Hi, I am Dr. Corey Miller, President and CEO of Ratio Christi, and we are joined here for this episode of Thoughtful Christianity, where we're going to discuss today Christians and lawsuits. Can those two things come together? My guest today is Travis Barham. He serves as the Senior Counsel for Alliance Defending Freedom, otherwise known as ADF popularly, where he plays a key role with the ADF Center for Academic Freedom. Barham's legal efforts with ADF since 2006 have focused on preserving and reclaiming religious freedom and freedom of speech for students and faculty at universities throughout the country. His work has been instrumental in securing several strategic appellate court victories in the Third, Fourth, and Seventh Circuits. He's got an earned BA from Grove City College and a Juris Doctor in 2006 from Washington and Lee University School of Law, where he graduated summa cum laude. Before graduating from the law school, he completed a ADF leadership development program to become a Blackstone Fellow in 2004. He's a member of the bars of Georgia and Arizona, and he is admitted to multiple federal district and appellate courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court. So, welcome to this episode of Thoughtful Christianity, Travis.
Thank you very much, Corey. It's a pleasure to be with you. And as I like to tell people, you can boil my introduction down to a simple support group style statement. Hi, my name is Travis, and I sue universities. So it's a pleasure to be able to talk about that today.
Love it. Not a lot of people want to engage with that. It's a hot potato topic we're going to discuss, and you with ADF are very active across the country in being helpful to many people. Myself personally, as a professor of ethics in 2014, relative to academic freedom and freedom of speech. How many allies would you say you have in that conglomerate that is ADF? You do a lot of this pro bono.
We have a vast network of allied attorneys across the country who donate time to support the body of Christ and to defend religious freedom and free speech. And then we also partner with other like-minded organizations that are interested in defending these same values. So, we take very seriously the first word in our name, alliance. We're not just a law firm or a legal organization, but we're an alliance building organization seeking to partner with those across the ideological spectrum that agree with us on the key issues.
Yeah, fantastic. And that reminds me, I forgot to mention this in the beginning. Ratio Christi, which means the reason of Christ, our subtitle is Campus Apologetics Alliance. We too believe in that and work together in tandem, in this case, defending the faith and defending the ability to defend the faith. We're on about 150 campuses with professors, high school students, and of course, university students. Now, you are a professing Christian and make a living being engaged in law and litigation. So before we look at what might be called a theology of litigation, how one sort of justifies or reconciles what you do with your Christian convictions and law, tell us, what is the mission of ADF more broadly, and why do you think it's important more generally?
Yeah, our mission at ADF is simple. It's to defend the right of people to live out their faith freely. And whether that's on campus or off campus, whether we're talking about the definition of the family, the sanctity of life, or just religious freedom more broadly, we seek to defend those key values. And we've been doing that since 1994, when a group of Christian leaders realized that the other side was winning key legal victories, largely because the Christian conservative side was not showing up, and when it was underfunded and ill-prepared. So that's when Alliance Defending Freedom came into being. And for the last 25 plus or so years, we've been defending those key values and key principles in the legal arena.
Yeah, and in addition to helping me out personally, which was absolutely huge, ADF has been a real help to Ratio Christi as a ministry that I've been overseeing for at least 6 years, but over the past decade. So maybe you could help highlight some of the most important cases where you've helped us out, and then maybe draw out, expound the implications of that work as it transcends us. It goes beyond us, setting precedent for others.
Gladly. See, in around 2006, Alliance Defending Freedom recognized the strategic value of defending free speech and religious freedom in higher education, because higher education is sort of a gateway of cultural influence. And so that's when we founded our Center for Academic Freedom that I'm privileged to be a part of. And as you mentioned, one of our key partners at the Center for Academic Freedom has been Ratio Christi, an apologetics ministry that's out there on the front line on a university campus. And so there's several different kinds of issues that often arise that affect Ratio Christi. And it's been a real privilege to stand with Ratio Christi and the students who are part of it to make sure that their ability to share their faith and express their values on campus is not interfered with. So some of these issues, they run the gamut. Sometimes when you have a group of students who's trying to start up a club, start up an organization on campus and get it recognized, university officials will try to create problems and impede that group from even getting formed or being able to operate on campus. So for example, several years ago, a group of students tried for 3 years to form a Ratio Christi club on the campus of the University of Colorado Springs. And each time, the university refused to let the club gain recognition, which is necessary in order to really operate on campus and be part of the campus community. And they refused because Ratio Christi insisted that the leaders of a Christian club should actually be Christians. Wow. And you look at this and you go, that's common sense. The college Republicans select Republicans as leaders, and the vegetarian group does not select a meat eater as its president. But to these officials at the University of Colorado Springs, simply saying that Christians should serve as the leaders of the group represented discrimination, and therefore the group couldn't be allowed. So we tried for 3 years to resolve that situation amicably.
It was very patient, right? We're not litigation happening.
Very patiently, and the students put in long hours trying to resolve that situation. But ultimately, the university dug in its heels, and so we had no choice but to file a lawsuit. And as soon as we did so, and as soon as the university officials realized that they were going to face accountability from someone higher than them, the college folded, the university folded. It changed its policies. It awarded recognition to the Ratio Christi chapter. The Ratio Christi chapter has been functioning ever since on campus without interference. And so, that impediment to ministry was removed through a lawsuit. And as soon as the university officials realized we're going to have to go downtown and talk to a federal judge about this, all of a sudden their tune changed. So that's one example. Another example just happened recently at the University of Houston, Clear Lake, where another Ratio Christi chapter was trying to get recognized on campus. And again, the university said you can't be recognized because you require your leaders to be Christians. And once again, as soon as we filed that lawsuit, university officials realized they were going to have to go downtown and talk to the federal judge about it, and they changed their tune immediately.
Yeah. Seemed like 24 hours. I know it was a little bit longer than that.
It was close to 24 hours. Yeah, it was close to 24 hours, and they changed their tune and recognized the club. And now we're in the process of working to get the policies changed so this won't happen to any other club. And the neat thing about this is it's not just a victory for Ratio Christi when we win these cases. It's a victory for all students and all student groups. Because the freedom we're protecting, the freedom of association, the freedom to gather together with students of like mind, is one that benefits every group of every persuasion, so that no one is interfered with as they try to share their values and their ideas on campus. So that's that's trying to get started on campus. And then sometimes you run into problems where you're trying to share your ideas on campus and the university tries to interfere once again. So this happened, for example, at Kennesaw State University when the Ratio Christi chapter tried to host a pro-life display. And they wanted to host it on the main quad on campus in a spot where other students had held similar displays. But the university officials said, no, we can't allow that to happen. We need to move you off to the side where nobody can see you.
Well, very inclusive.
Very inclusive, very tolerant perspective of removing ideas they don't like from public view. And so we then once again had to sue. And again, as soon as we filed that lawsuit, very quickly the university changed its tune, decided that, that speech zone policy where we quarantine ideas we don't like in remote areas of campus, that needs to go away. And the First Amendment rights of students need to be respected. So these are examples of where campus ministry is actually being actively impeded via policies that are blatantly unconstitutional, and where the only way to actually make those policies go away and ensure that the law is respected is to actually bring the lawsuit and let university officials realize that they are going to be held accountable. So you have this happen when you're trying to express your ideas. You have it happen when you're trying to form your club on campus. And then you have it also when you're trying to bring in speakers to campus. And this is Ratio Christi's case right now at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Ratio Christi invited a speaker to come to campus, a philosopher, to address the problem of evil. Is actually a gentleman who had once been a professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And they sought funding from student government, and student government said no. Why? Because they have a policy that does not allow funding to go to any speaker of an ideological or political nature. Now, the problem with this is that the Supreme Court ruled in 1995 that such restrictions are illegal. Word apparently hadn't spread to Nebraska. So we have filed suit right now, and the reason we've done so is the university officials said they wouldn't allow this philosopher to speak on campus because he only presented one perspective. Well, every speaker only presents one perspective. And they said that his Christian perspective was the ideological perspective that barred him from getting any funding. And what's ironic about this is that the selectivity with which this policy is enforced. So, for example, the college has allowed and funded Bill Nye to speak. The college has on climate change, which is clearly an ideological issue. The college has allowed Jim Obergefell, the plaintiff in the same-sex marriage case at the Supreme Court, to speak. Clearly an ideological speaker. They've even allowed Laverne Cox, the transgender actor, to speak on campus. So all of that is perfectly fine, but you allow a Christian philosopher to address an issue of biblical doctrine, and that's all of a sudden when the warning flags go up. So it's this sort of selectivity that allows the university to create sort of a lopsided playing field on campus where some groups get special treatment, the groups the university likes, and then others are treated, in a far, far different and far, far more disfavored fashion, exiled from accessing any campus resources. And so these are the kinds of cases that we bring on behalf of Ratio Christi, and we're very thankful for God's people across the country who have donated generously to us to allow us to represent students like these students at Ratio Christi for free. So, but it's this kind of litigation that is key if we're going to actually turn universities back to the marketplace of ideas that they are supposed to be, where all perspectives can be voiced on an equal basis.
Right. And this last one you brought up in terms of the University of Nebraska, it was ironic that the speaker there was a former tenured professor and department head at the University of Nebraska. So this one picked up some networks that I'm part of on Facebook of Christian philosophers, because everybody knows Robert Audi, that professor who wrote the Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy. Every professor in the country's got to own that one. And they thought, wow, I can't believe that something's happening there based on, his ideology. But then someone else piped in and says, yeah, but that Ratio Christi group, they're just sue happy anyway. They just like to litigate. That seems to be their modus operandi. I responded back and I said, look, in some of the cases we've been involved in, we've waited 3 years, as you pointed out. Very patient. But some of this stuff is it's just frankly nonsense. And, a couple of years ago, I was first introduced to what you would call your theology of litigation, as I was invited, along with a number of presidents and vice presidents and maybe some board members, to a campus ministry summit where I was on a panel on campus access. Should we sue or should we not sue? And I remember making the case that, we have strength in numbers. We need to do this together. Otherwise, they start picking us apart one by one, and they're coming for us. It's not a matter of if, but when, because there are some real radicals out there. But I remember having to try to persuade some of the other executives of different campus ministries that this is not a problem, but they would be concerned about this, that Christians being involved in lawsuits, period, shouldn't happen. And so maybe you can help us navigate some of the major objections internal to Christian thought on this matter, even though litigation or pre-litigation, just threatening the possibility, has been very helpful to Ratio Christi, very helpful to me and to many, many other people across the country. Is it biblical? And so maybe a couple of items here to bring up. Even though the New Testament authors like Paul and Peter specifically put forth the idea that Christians ought to be submissive to government and to authority more generally, such that if a university authority determines that a campus ministry cannot be involved on a campus, that should be the end of it, shouldn't it?
Not at all. But before I get to that, let me back up to one point you made. Okay. This accusation that Ratio Christi is litigation happy is simply absurd. In fact, not only did we wait 3 years in that Colorado case before taking any action, the number of times that Ratio Christi chapters contact us and that we're able to resolve things in a peaceful fashion before ever having to get to litigation far outnumbers the number of lawsuits that we filed on your behalf. So whenever possible, we are trying to seek a resolution of these issues without having to resort to litigation. But litigation is a perfectly permissible thing for a Christian organization to engage in, especially when standing up for one's civil rights. So, like you said, often what I'll hear from folks who object to Christians taking legal action is this idea that we're supposed to submit to the governing authorities, like you mentioned, Paul and Peter. And that sounds good at first blush, but when you actually think about it a little bit more and analyze what Paul and Peter had to say, it falls apart. For example, Paul and Peter say to be subject to the governing authorities. Well, notice that governing authorities is plural. There's more than one. The university official that says you can't do this or you can't become a club is not the be-all and end-all of governing authorities. There's a higher authority, the First Amendment, that all university officials must submit themselves to. And so when a Christian files a civil rights lawsuit, such as the ones we've been describing here, he's not rebelling against authority. All he's doing is saying to the university official, hey, I got to obey the law, but so do you. And there's a legal mechanism here that allows me to ensure that you follow the law and you submit to the governing authorities, just as I'm trying to do. So this is not an act of rebellion. It's not an act of revolt. All it is it is a perfectly permissible legal way of resolving a dispute and ensuring that the highest governing authorities in our country, in this case, the First Amendment, remain respected and cherished and our freedoms remain secure.
Yeah, so as Paul appealed to Caesar for his Roman citizenship, we appeal likewise to Caesar.
Yes.
In that same regard. The other issue that someone might bring up is, that might be fine for a government, perhaps in certain cases. Maybe it's not wise. Maybe it's permissible. Is it prescriptive? Doesn't the Bible expressly forbid, however, Christians from filing lawsuits in 1 Corinthians 6? I mean, it uses the term, doesn't it?
Not at all. Not at all. 1 Corinthians 6 merely talks about suing other believers. And there's some debate over whether that means all believers worldwide or whether that just means fellow member of a local church. But even if we interpret that broadly, when a Christian group like Ratio Christi is suing a university, it's not suing a fellow believer. It's suing an institution. That institution, by definition, cannot be a believer. And when you're suing specific university officials, you're not running afoul of 1 Corinthians 6, because when you sue them when you sue them in their official capacity, you're essentially just suing their office. It's another way of suing the institution. So you're not suing a believer. Now, there are some instances where we have to sue individuals in their individual capacities. Somebody might say, well, doesn't that run afoul of 1 Corinthians 6? But even there, that's not the case. Never. I've been doing this for 15 years. And And never once have I seen a university official have to pay out of his own resources for any of the misbehavior that they've ever committed. So even when you're suing someone in their individual capacities, all you're doing is it's another way that the law allows to prevent the official from evading accountability. It gets complicated with the 11th Amendment, but to boil it all down to a nutshell, it's just a way of ensuring that the universities still remain accountable for the misbehavior that their officials conduct on the job. So we're not suing another believer. We're not taking a personal dispute from within the body of Christ to a secular court. We are taking a dispute between a Christian ministry and the government to a court and saying, listen, the highest governing authority in our land needs to be respected. And that's the First Amendment.
Yeah, in one way, I kind of look at it like we are just helping the university with continuing education about the U.S. Constitution.
Well, it's interesting that even the courts talk about how the civil rights statutes and constitutional provisions allow private citizens to serve as sort of a constitutional law enforcement agency, actually enforcing the law, not rebelling against the law, but actually enforcing the law in a way that improves society, not just for the group involved, but for everyone.
Good citizenship.
Yes.
So the other element would be, Peter and Paul, that's one thing. But what about the guy who we have red lettering, Jesus? He talked about turning the other cheek, and elsewhere we're taught to, live at peace with all men. But lawsuits seem to essentially involve conflict, don't they?
They definitely involve conflict. It's a peaceful way of resolving conflict. That's why we have them. And what's vital to understand about the Sermon on the Mount is the context. When Jesus was preaching the Sermon on the Mount, he was talking about instances in which the Pharisees had taken Old Testament principles, biblical principles, and twisted them to minimize them for their own particular gain. So, for example, he talks about, you've heard it said, thou shalt not murder, but I say unto you. And he's expanding what that command from the Old Testament means, making the bar even higher. And so what the Pharisees had often done was they had interpreted this eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth principle as an excuse for retribution and revenge. And Jesus is saying, no, we don't. The revenge and retaliation is off the table. The Lord will handle all of that. So it's a condemnation of a quest for personal revenge. But when a Christian files a civil rights lawsuit, the issue is not personal revenge. The issue is ensuring that freedom is respected. And so it's not a personal dispute. It is merely an effort to ensure that the law is respected, that freedom is respected and cherished in our country. And it's also important to realize we can't take the turn the other cheek passage too literally, because when Jesus was struck on the cheek at his trial, and he didn't literally turn his face to say, hit me again.
Right. He
questioned the authority of the person to strike him. And Paul did something similar when he was attacked, when he faced a similar situation. So these are we have to balance scripture with scripture and read it all in context. And when you do, you realize that the core point that Jesus was making in Sermon on the Mount was a condemnation of retaliation, but that principle does not apply when we're talking about a civil rights lawsuit to enforce constitutional freedoms.
Yeah, the history of the universities are such that they were founded by Christians with Christ at the center, and now it seems like we're on the outside, and if we're lucky, we get to peer through the windows.
Yes.
All we're asking for is for equal treatment, inclusivity under the law of the land, which is the U.S. Constitution. So, litigation may be permissive for Christians then, but is it normative? Is it prescriptive? That is, why do you think in some cases Christians actually ought to sue or litigate, or at least be prepared to do so?
Well, the core reason from a biblical perspective, I hold that position, is because that's what Paul did. On multiple occasions, Paul didn't blink or blush at exercising his civil rights under the Roman system. I mean, he even appealed to the Supreme Court of his day, Caesar. Mm-hmm. And Sometimes he did so when he was facing a severe physical threat, such as a beating without a trial. Other times, he even exercised his civil rights when there was no threat. For example, in Acts 16, when he was ministering in Philippi, the mob came, the authorities beat him and threw him in jail. And we're all familiar with the story of he and Silas sitting in jail singing hymns until the earthquake comes and then ministering to the jailer. But that's not the end of that story. The next day, when they're back in jail, the city officials realized that they had just beaten a Roman citizen and thrown him in jail without a trial. They had just violated his rights. But it was all done. Everything, the violation had already occurred. So they sent a messenger over to the jail saying, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, but basically, hey, Paul, why don't we let bygones be bygones and just live at peace with one another? And how about you guys just like leave town quietly and we'll all pretend this didn't happen? And Paul's answer was not to say, sure. His answer was not to say, oh, well, we live at peace with one another. No, his response was to say, basically, how dare you? You just violated my rights with no reason and no excuse. And you think you're just going to privately pretend this didn't happen? No way. You city officials need to come down here to this jail and walk me out of town to acknowledge the fact that you messed up and you violated my rights. And what's interesting to me is that we actually have in American law a very similar principle. And this is actually, it was just reaffirmed recently by the Supreme Court of the United States in a case where Ratio Christi filed a friend of the court brief. We represented a young man, Chike Uzubunim, who was preaching the gospel on his campus when he was a student at Georgia Gwinnett College, just a few minutes from where I'm standing right now. And twice, university officials came out to shut him down. Once because he was supposedly violating their speech zone policy, which restricted student speech to a ridiculously small area of campus. And then second, because people complained about his speech when he was standing in the free speech zone. And then when we filed suit, the school tried to quickly change its policies and then say, oh, we'll just all pretend nothing ever happened here. And we said, no. You need to acknowledge the violation that you committed against Mr. Uzubunim by paying him a nominal amount of damages. This is the legal way of acknowledging that you violated his rights at the time he was trying to speak, depriving him of the opportunity of ever speaking to his fellow students. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court reaffirmed this principle yet again, holding that government officials cannot get a free pass when they violate someone's rights. It's the essential equivalent of what Paul was trying to exert in Acts 16 when he said, no, you don't get to quietly pretend this never happened. You have to come down as government officials and acknowledge the fact that you committed a wrong against me. And so when you have someone like Paul, who wrote more than half of the New Testament, exercising his civil rights in such a vigorous fashion, it's a compelling case that that's exactly what we as Christians should be doing, especially when these legal violations threaten our ability to share the gospel and share biblical teachings with others around us. That is, after all, our mission, to share Christ's love and Christ's teachings with those around us. And yet it's impossible for a college ministry like Ratio Christi to actually fulfill that ministry if it is excluded from its mission field.
Right. If we're kicked off campus or not allowed on campus, there's not a bullhorn loud enough for us to get that message out. And that's what Ratio Christi, which is the reason of Christ, is all about. We believe that Jesus is the solution to the problems of the human condition in the world. We believe that Christianity is true. We simply want the platform and opportunity that everyone else has to make our case, and we try to generate more light than heat in doing so. But we really believe that Christians need to galvanize together, coalesce together, coalition build together on this, and consider the strategic nature of the university. As goes the university, so goes the culture. And as goes the U.S. university, so goes the world right now. So we are thankful for Alliance Defending Freedom, thankful for your service with us, Travis, and may God multiply your kind and the opportunity for us to debate in a healthy, good, loving way on the campuses.
Thank you, and may God bless Ratio Christi and its efforts on campuses across the country, because it is a privilege to stand with organizations like Ratio Christi. But even with all of the resources and the talents that folks here at ADF have and are willing to put into this effort, it's impossible for us to do anything without groups like Ratio Christi and other students on campus willing to take that stand and be that salt and light to their campus. And when they're willing to take a stand, we're ready to stand with them. And when we stand together, good things can happen.
Amen. We believe in defending the faith and defending the ability to defend the faith. All right. Thanks a lot, Travis Barham, for ADF.
Thank you.